The Heir and the Outcast. Who carries the promise? Hey guys and fellow seekers of truth. Today we embark on a profound journey through time. One that begins in the tents of Abraham and stretches into the headlines of our modern world. At the heart of this journey are two brothers, Isaac and Ishmael. Born to the same father, but destined for different paths. Their story is more than ancient scripture. It is a living narrative that continues to echo through the corridors of history. Isaac, through whom the Jewish people trace their lineage, and Ishmael, regarded as the forefather of many Arab nations, represent more than just genetic divergence. Their story has become a symbolic lens through which we can view the enduring tensions between nations like Israel and Iran, two modern powers often seen as the prime example of this ancient divide. As we witness escalating conflict in the Middle East, with Israel and Iran locked in a dangerous geopolitical standoff, the echoes of that original sibling rivalry feel hauntingly present. The struggle over land, identity, and divine promise, first played out in the deserts of Canaan, now unfolds in the skies over Tehran and Tel Aviv, in diplomatic chambers and on global news feeds.
Today, Israel is defending freedom in the Middle East and beyond. We're doing so against a tyrannical and radical Iranian regime that wants to build atomic bombs to destroy us and wants to build ballistic missiles, including intercontinental ballistic missile, to be able to threaten anyone and everywhere in the world. By defending ourselves, we're also defending others. We're defending our Arab neighbors, our Arab friends in peace. We're defending Europe. We're helping defend also the United States, which helps us all the time in our defense. This is an important mission.
Yet this is not merely a tale of conflict. It is also a call to remember that both Isaac and Ishmael were blessed by God, and both were promised to become great nations. Their shared heritage is a reminder that reconciliation is not only possible, it is rooted in the very origins of their story. To fully grasp the significance of Isaac and Ishmael, we must understand the spiritual and social dynamics of the time. In the ancient Near East, lineage and inheritance were paramount, especially for a man like Abraham, who had received the divine promise that his descendants would become a great nation. In Genesis 12:2.
Isaac's story begins with his parents, Abraham and Sarah, who were advanced in age and childless. But then, God intervened and made a promise that would change their lives forever. Genesis 12 verses 1-4 recorded God's first words to him about a homeland for his offspring. Even though the gift of a son is not directly mentioned in this first communication, God hinted at his plan for Abram. Abraham was 75 years old when he first received the promise, and Genesis 21 verse 5 tells us he was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Sarah was 90. So Abraham and Sarah waited 25 years for the fulfillment of God's promise. during the 25-year period from when Abram received the promise of a son to the birth of Isaac. Abram and Sarah entertained various notions on how they could bring about the fulfillment of the promise.
But as years passed and Sarah remained childless, doubt crept in. In a culturally accepted but spiritually fraught decision, Sarah offered her Egyptian maidservant Hagar to Abraham as a surrogate, a practice not uncommon in that era.
In Genesis 16:3, Sarah, who was still called Sarai, suggests to Abraham, who was still called Abram, to have a child with her Egyptian maidservant Hagar, whom she gives to him as a wife. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. Genesis 16:3.
Hagar bore Ishmael. It seemed he might be the fulfillment of God's promise. But then, in a miraculous twist, Sarah conceived in her old age and gave birth to Isaac. This birth was not just a biological event, it was a divine intervention, a reaffirmation that God's covenant would be fulfilled not through human improvisations, but through his own design.
Nevertheless, tensions arose as Hagar began to view Sarai with contempt, and Sarai responded by treating Hagar harshly. The situation escalated to the point where Hagar decided to flee. In the desert, God encountered Hagar, offering her encouragement to return to Abram and Sarai, which she eventually did, Genesis 16. After a span of 13 years from the birth of Ishmael, God reaffirmed his covenant with Abram, introducing two significant changes. Firstly, God commanded Abram to undergo circumcision as a sign of the covenant. Secondly, God altered Abram's name to Abraham, signifying father of a multitude, while Sarai's name became Sarah, representing mother of nations. God informed Abraham that Sarah would bear him a son, named Isaac, who would be the recipient of the covenant. Through Isaac, God intended to establish his divine agreement. Although God would also bestow blessings upon Ishmael, it was Isaac who held the status of the promised son, through whom the nations would receive divine favor, Genesis 17. The name Isaac, meaning, he laughs, derived from the laughter of both Abraham and Sarah upon hearing the news. Despite their advanced ages, Abraham at 100 years old and Sarah at 90 years old, and Sarah's lifelong barrenness, they found the notion of having a child amusing, Genesis 18:9, 15. Isaac came to be known as Abraham's second son, as his first son, Ishmael, was born to Hagar, Sarah's maidservant, due to Sarah's impatience in providing Abraham with offspring, Genesis 16 verses 1-2. Once Isaac was old enough to be weaned, Sarah insisted that Abraham send Hagar and her son away, securing the sole inheritance rights for Isaac, Genesis 21 verses 3-12. Regrettably, the tension between Sarah and Hagar persisted even after Isaac's weaning. On the occasion of a feast held by Abraham, Ishmael, Hagar's son, began to mock Isaac. Sarah urged Abraham to remove Hagar and Ishmael from their midst, insisting that Ishmael should not share in the inheritance alongside Isaac. Although Abraham felt distressed by this demand, God instructed him to comply with Sarah's wishes, assuring him that his descendants would be traced through Isaac. Consequently, Abraham reluctantly sent Hagar and Ishmael away, and God compassionately provided for their well-being, Genesis 21:8-21. It was following these events that God tested Abraham's faith by asking him to sacrifice Isaac.
The tension between the two sons and their mothers soon escalated. Sarah, protective of Isaac's inheritance, urged Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away. Though painful, Abraham complied after God assured him that Ishmael too would become a great nation in Genesis 21:13.
Deeply upset, Sarah asked Abraham to send away Hagar and her son. Abraham considered Ishmael the son God had promised him. Indeed, even when God revealed that Sarah would bear a son, Abraham questioned the need for this birth, since Ishmael could be his heir. In Genesis 17:18, Abraham says to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." Even after Isaac's birth, Abraham continued to treat Ishmael kindly, saddened by Sarah's desire to disown him. Sarah, for her part, saw Ishmael as a threat to Isaac's place in the family and wanted to get rid of him. Genesis 21, 1-34.
Yet the covenant, the spiritual legacy, would pass through Isaac. Genesis 17:19. This divergence set the stage for two monumental lineages: Isaac, the forefather of the Israelites, and Ishmael, traditionally regarded as the ancestor of many Arab peoples. Their story is not merely about family drama, it's a theological and historical fork in the road that continues to shape identities and conflicts to this day. The narrative of Isaac and Ishmael is a complex one, filled with themes of faith, family, and divine promise. Ishmael, the firstborn, is often seen as the product of human effort and doubt, while Isaac, the miracle child, is viewed as a fulfillment of God's promise.
The idea is that when God kept his promises to Abraham, he was not constrained by natural and ordinary laws. In other words, by the flesh. Although God's preference for Isaac as the son of the wife conforms to custom, the rejection of Hagar and Ishmael made the contrast more striking. Hagar was sent away with her son into the wilderness. Genesis chapter 21, verses 10-14:10. Therefore she said to Abraham, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely, with Isaac." 11. And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. 12. But God said to Abraham, "Do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called." 13. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman because he is your seed.
The tension between the two brothers is palpable, with Ishmael's mocking of Isaac in Genesis 21:9, often interpreted as a symbol of the older brother's resentment toward the younger sibling's favored status.
This request to expel the maidservant and her son seemed to contravene all norms of ancient law. The children of maidservants could be demoted, but not dismissed without valid cause. The fact that Abraham resisted such treatment, only acting on God's command, suggests the action undertaken was not in accordance with the standards of the time. One may wonder about Sarah's reaction. Was it because of an act committed by Ishmael that threatened Isaac, or was it simply his existence that posed a threat? Genesis 21:9 tells us, "Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing." Does this mean Ishmael was mocking Isaac or merely playing with him? Does the word scoffing in this context mean mocking, deriding, or simply rejoicing in the situation? Sarah perceives Ishmael as a rival to Isaac, not because of any act he may have committed, but because of his very existence. The author of Genesis recounts the story of Ishmael, mainly to establish a contrast between Isaac and Ishmael, not as individuals, but as representations of God's work.
The moment in Genesis 21:9 where Ishmael is seen mocking Isaac is deceptively brief, but it opens a window into a deeply layered family drama, one that blends human emotion, divine promise, and generational tension. The Hebrew word used for mocking, mechek, can mean anything from playful laughter to scornful ridicule. Given Sarah's strong reaction demanding that Hagar and Ishmael be cast out, is often interpreted as more than innocent fun. Many scholars and commentators suggest that Ishmael, as the older son, may have felt threatened by Isaac's arrival and the shift in the inheritance rights.
This seems to be a common custom of the time, since Jacob's wives also resorted to it. The wife offers a servant to her husband, but all children born from this union are considered hers, which could be an early form of surrogacy. In antiquity, it was common for a barren woman to offer her husband a servant who would bear children in her stead. It was the wife, not the servant, who raised the children. If this solution may have seemed judicious to Abraham and Sarah, it created more problems than it solved. Hagar did indeed have a child with Abraham. When Hagar learned she was pregnant, she began to despise Sarah, and Sarah sought help from Abraham. Genesis 16:4-5 states, "So when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Then Sarai said to Abram, 'My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me.'" Genesis 16:4-5. Abraham allowed Sarah to act as she wished. Sarah then mistreated Hagar, who fled from her. Sarah, being barren, had obtained a son from Hagar, and Ishmael was legally Sarah's child. However, this does not explain how Sarah treated Hagar. A few years later, God established a covenant with Abraham, requiring circumcision of all male members of his household. God commanded Abraham to circumcise his son Ishmael, as well as all other males in his household, including slaves born in his household and those acquired from foreigners. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and Ishmael was 13. The birth of Isaac, the legitimate son of Sarah and Abraham, exacerbated the already strained relational tensions between Sarah and Hagar. Indeed, these had begun long before Ishmael's birth, as mentioned previously. It was
Isaac, after all, was the child of promise, born to Sarah and Abraham in their old age, fulfilling God's covenant. Ishmael, although also Abraham's son, was born of Hagar, Sarah's maidservant, in a moment of human impatience and divine timing. This distinction created a symbolic divide, Ishmael representing human effort and Isaac representing divine fulfillment. Sarah's reaction can be seen as both maternal protectiveness and a reflection of her own insecurities. She feared that Ishmael's presence and perhaps his influence might jeopardize Isaac's future. Her demand to send Hagar and Ishmael away wasn't just about a moment of mockery, it was about securing the legacy of the promised child. In a broader theological sense, this episode has been interpreted as a metaphor for the tension between law and grace, or between the old covenant and the new. Paul in Galatians 4:29 even references this moment to illustrate the conflict between those born according to the flesh and those born through the promise. It's a powerful reminder of how family dynamics, when entangled with divine purpose, can become both deeply personal and profoundly symbolic.
14. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water, and putting it on her shoulder, he gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. Then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. They were about to die of thirst when God heard the boy and provided him with water. However, God still had plans for Ishmael. He assured Hagar that Ishmael, as Abraham's son, would become a great nation. Genesis 21:17-18. The fulfillment of this prophecy is reported in Genesis 25:12-18. Ishmael had 12 sons who became powerful leaders and eventually a nation. Here is how it happened. Hagar, who herself was of Egyptian origin, chose an Egyptian wife for her son, and Ishmael settled in the wilderness of Paran. Genesis 21:21. 18. They dwelt from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt as you go toward Assyria. Genesis 25:18. He had 12 sons and 1 daughter. The Bible lists Ishmael's sons in Genesis 25:13. 13. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, then Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, 14 Mishma, Duma, Massa, 15 Hadar, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedema. Surprisingly, he is credited with 12 sons, just as Jacob had 12 sons. This compares to the 12 sons of Nahor and the 12 sons of Esau. Later, Ishmael's daughter married Esau, Isaac's son, as indicated in Genesis 28:9.
This debate over the righteous seed of Abraham is not just a theological divergence. It's a deeply symbolic and emotionally charged issue that has shaped religious identity, political boundaries, and cultural narratives for centuries. In Judaism and Christianity, Isaac is seen as the divinely appointed heir to Abraham's covenant. According to Genesis 17:19, God explicitly tells Abraham, "Your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him." This covenant includes the promise of land, descendants, and a special relationship with God, elements that form the backbone of the Jewish identity, and by extension, Christian theology, which sees Jesus as a descendant of Isaac through David.
Isaac's story begins with his parents, Abraham and Sarah, who were advanced in age and childless. But then, God intervened and made a promise that would change their lives forever. Genesis 12 verses 1-4 recorded God's first words to him about a homeland for his offspring. Even though the gift of a son is not directly mentioned in this first communication, God hinted at his plan for Abram. Abraham was 75 years old when he first received the promise, and Genesis 21 verse 5 tells us he was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Sarah was 90. So Abraham and Sarah waited 25 years for the fulfillment of God's promise. During the 25-year period from when Abram received the promise of a son to the birth of Isaac, Abram and Sarah entertained various notions on how they could bring about the fulfillment of the promise.
Islam, however, honors Ishmael as the firstborn and prophet in his own right. While the Quran does not name the son nearly sacrificed by Abraham, Islamic tradition overwhelmingly identifies him as Ishmael. Muslims believe that Ishmael and his mother Hagar were not cast aside, but rather chosen for a different divine purpose, one that would culminate in the rise of the Arab peoples and the eventual revelation of Islam through the Prophet Muhammad, who is believed to be a descendant of Ishmael.
What do we know about Ishmael according to the Bible? Ishmael was Abraham's first son, born when Abraham was 86 years old and living near Hebron. In Genesis 15, God promises Abraham during an apparition that he will have a son and become the father of many nations. At that time, Abraham had no children. His wife Sarah was unable to conceive, and they questioned how this promise would be fulfilled. It was in the desert that the angel of the Lord met Hagar and ordered her to return to Abraham. It was also there that the angel of the Lord told her the son she was carrying was to be named Ishmael. What does Ishmael mean? It means God has heard. Indeed, the Lord heard Hagar's distress. Genesis chapter 16, verse 11. However, the discord between Sarah and Hagar reached its peak at Isaac's weaning. Isaiah 67 mentions the descendants of Nebaioth and Kedar as sheep breeders. Ishmael's descendants were called Arabs, which basically means nomads. From the beginning, Ishmael's descendants were a warring people, as they lived in hostility toward all their brothers. Thus was fulfilled God's prediction that Ishmael would be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Genesis 16:12.
After Sarah demanded that Hagar and her son Ishmael be sent away, Abraham reluctantly complied. Hagar wandered into the desert of Beersheba with only a skin of water and some bread. When the provisions ran out, she placed Ishmael under a bush, unable to watch him die, and wept in despair. At that moment, the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, saying, "Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Genesis 21:17 and 18.
The idea is that when God kept his promises to Abraham, he was not constrained by natural and ordinary laws. In other words, by the flesh. Although God's preference for Isaac as the son of the wife conforms to custom, the rejection of Hagar and Ishmael made the contrast more striking. Hagar was sent away with her son into the wilderness. Genesis chapter 21, verses 10 to 14:10. Therefore she said to Abraham, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely, with Isaac." 11. And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. 12. But God said to Abraham, "Do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called." 13. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman because he is your seed.
Then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water. She filled the skin and gave Ishmael a drink, saving his life. This divergence in sacred narrative has had profound geopolitical consequences. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for example, is often framed in terms of land and sovereignty, but beneath the surface lies a deeper spiritual and historical tension. Both peoples trace their roots to Abraham and claim divine legitimacy through their respective lineages. The land of Canaan, promised to Isaac's descendants in the Bible, is also sacred to Muslims, who see it as part of their Abrahamic inheritance through Ishmael. The result is a collision of sacred histories, where each side views itself as the rightful heir to a divine promise. This isn't just about ancient texts, it's about identity, belonging, and the enduring human need to be seen and chosen. This encounter is rich with meaning. God hears the cries of the vulnerable, not just Hagar's, but Ishmael's too.
Later, other peoples settled in the Arabian Peninsula, including descendants of Abraham's sons by Keturah, 1 Chronicles 1:32-33, and some descendants of Esau, namely the Amalekites, Genesis 36-12. Even though Isaac alone remained Abraham's heir, Ishmael and Abraham's other sons by concubines were also blessed by him, as Genesis 25 indicates. This means that Hagar's sons, as well as Keturah's, received material goods from the patriarch. Once grown, the Bible reports no conflicts between Ishmael and Isaac. They are both described as burying Abraham at Machpelah in Genesis 25:9. Most of these names are mentioned in other passages of the Bible as influential tribal families of that time.
The historical rivalry between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael has evolved from a family fracture into a symbolic framework for some of the most enduring and complex conflicts in human history. While the biblical narrative itself does not prescribe perpetual hostility, its legacy has been interpreted and reinterpreted across centuries to justify political, religious, and territorial disputes. The Crusades were not simply military expeditions, they were deeply infused with religious fervor. European Christians, believing themselves to be the spiritual heirs of Isaac through Jesus Christ, launched campaigns to reclaim the Holy Land from the Muslim control. Muslims, many of whom traced their spiritual lineage to Ishmael, saw the invasions as both a threat to their faith and sovereignty. Jerusalem, sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, became the epicenter of this clash, its stones soaked in the blood of competing claims to divine inheritance. Fast forward to the modern Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we see echoes of this ancient rivalry refracted through the lens of nationalism, colonial history, and religious identity. Both Israelis and Palestinians lay claim to the land as a birthright. Israelis often invoke in the biblical covenant with Isaac, and the Palestinians, many of whom are Muslim, drawing on their connection to Ishmael as centuries of continuous presence in the region. This isn't merely a territorial dispute. It's a collision of sacred narratives, where each side sees itself as the rightful steward of a divine promise. The land becomes more than geography. It becomes theology, memory, and identity. As we look at the story of Isaac and Ishmael, we're reminded that the roots of human conflict often lie not in the events themselves, but in how those events are remembered, interpreted, and passed down through generations. The narrative of these two brothers, born of the same father, yet destined for different paths, has become a powerful symbol in the religious consciousness of billions. For Jews and Christians, Isaac represents the child of promise, the heir through whom God's covenant would unfold. For Muslims, Ishmael is the firstborn, a prophet in his own right, and the spiritual ancestor of the Arab peoples. And yet, while we may never fully reconcile these interpretations, we can choose to approach them with humility and empathy. Let us move forward, not with hardened hearts, but with open minds, recognizing that the legacy of Isaac and Ishmael is not just about what was, but about what still can be. But about what still can be. Also recognizing his remnant is in every religion. These wars in the Middle East and wars dealing with Israel have always been about the claim to the righteous seed. I hope you enjoyed a look at and walk into the story of Isaac and Ishmael. Have a great day, guys.